All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Shepard. I am the president of AFCOM Southern California Chapter. I'd like to welcome everybody to our second quarter 2026, forgot what year it was, educational series webinar. And let me go back through. I want to share my screen and we are going to go into presentation mode. All right. So, um, welcome to the second quarter 2026 annual review of what we talked about, what we heard, and what we learned at the annual PTC and Data Center World conferences. What I'd like to do is, as we are starting here, is allow our board to introduce themselves. Why don't we kind of go alphabetically, and maybe David, we start with you.
All right, I'm David Sipes. I'm the treasurer of Southern California chapter, and I've been here about 13 years. You've probably seen me and Jason running this thing for about 13 years now. So very excited to have everybody on today, and I'll pass it over to Di.
Diane Crayville Delson, owner of DKKD Staffing, and I've been on the board about 6 or
All right. Caitlin, I think we jump to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining all of us. I'm the newest member of the board. I think I've been on for about 6 months or so. I'm with CPI and I'm very excited to be here. And thank you, guys. Over
And
to you,
Thomas.
Thomas.
Hey, my name is Tom. I'm the data center manager for the San Diego Supercomputer Center. I manage a facility, an operations team, and a network team for a hyperscale facility. We run multiple supercomputers, both for dedicated customers and as a shared resource across national university research communities. I've been on the board for about 4 years now.
And
Yeet.
my name is Yeet Bullet. I'm with Ramble. I am the electrical design lead for our data center facilities group. We're an international consulting engineering firm that specializes in all things built environment, cradle to grave service, basically. Our group specializes in the planning, design, and commissioning of data centers. That's what we do for a living, day in, day out. I've been on the board for a few years, been a member of AFCOM SoCal chapter for about as long as Jason's been on the board.
And then I guess I don't know that we've got Doug, Todd, Brad on the call here today. But just to kind of give everybody an overview as far as how our board works. First of all, my name is Jason Shepard, so I'm the president of our chapter. I've been on the board since 2013, and I think in dog years that means forever. Um, but the way our board is set up for the AFCOM Southern California chapter, it's not just AFCOM Orange County or LA or San Diego. It's literally the AFCOM Southern California chapter. So the way we're set up is we've got a number of members up in Los Angeles with David and Di and Todd and Yeet. I'm the one here in Orange County. We're looking to expand our board here in Orange County. If you're interested, please reach out to me. Down in San Diego, we've got Brad, Doug, Caitlin, and Tom. So it's also important to note that we are a not-for-profit organization, so we are all volunteering our times with the board and the chapter for the greater education of the Southern California-based IT and data center operations communities. So that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to go through fairly quickly what we learned at these different data center conferences. I think it's important to note that I'm a prolific note taker. And so I used to go to all these different conferences, and whether it's PTC, Data Center World, the YADA conferences, Data Center Dynamics, all the different major conferences, and I physically take my notes for whatever I can. Now we've got this great thing with AI. I can actually walk in, record the actual session, which I do with my Fireflies app on my iPhone, and then it spits out a bunch of the actual intelligence as far as what it learned from the event, and then we can actually supplement as a board with our comments. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back through what we weren't able to get to in this last session is a lot of the highlights from PTC. And then we'll go through some of the highlights from Data Center World, and then we'll look at Q&A there at the end. If one of the board members can do a favor for me and watch the Q&A section to see if there's anything that's come in. So that
quick
being
comment.
said,
Jason, quick comment. Yeet, I had really hard time hearing you.
Okay.
Maybe closer to the microphone or turn up
Is this
volume
any
a little
better?
bit.
That works. We can
All
hear you
right,
good.
cool.
Yeah, sounds good,
Awesome.
Brian.
So just there's one slide I wanted to kind of reshare from the last session, which was the 2026. So the AFCOM, the national organization that we're all a part of, and the AFCOM is the Association for Computer Operations Management, the Data Center Industry Association. And they do an annual data center survey. And so we've been doing this looking at years, and I'll take bits of information from different years. Sometimes they're different questions, sometimes they're the same questions. For the 2026 data center report, they looked at what the average densities are per cabinet. You can see in 2021, densities were at 7 kilowatts per cabinet. Now they're at 27 kilowatts power per rack. So you can see that's a 4x growth over the last 5 years. So things are getting more dense. AI is playing a big role in that equation. There's some liquid cooling stats there, but the other thing I really want to point out to everybody was that third major bullet point down, code generation. On-site code generation is playing a major role in the data center industry today. And what on-site code generation is supplementing or replacing what you're getting from your utility provider with generating your own power on site. And the reason why I wanted to share that specifically because now more than ever, a lot of these different conferences, we're really starting to see some of the presentations that are geared towards that on-site code generation piece. The last bullet point down below relative to rebalancing cloud workloads, you'll see the reference to cloud repatriation. And this was back when kind of cloud first hit the market, and some of the CIOs say, "Hey, we're moving to the cloud." Well, it's not the cloud; it's just cloud, right? Because each cloud has its own operation, so it's real multi-cloud. It's just cloud. And so, what you'll see is that in 2022, 59% of users were moving some of their mic loads back from cloud. Instead of cloud repatriation, we're mostly looking at this as more like more balancing of your loads. As of 2026, 67% of users were migrating applications back from cloud, likely to servers inside of a colocation facilities. The challenge with this is right now, you'll hear throughout the presentation and the discussion today is vacancy rates across the board for colocation space are below 2%. And there's a lot of issues challenging that. So let's talk about PTC. PTC is the Pacific Telecom Council's annual conference in Honolulu every January. I've been going out for the last 5 years straight. A lot of people are sitting by the pool having margaritas and cocktails and so forth. I'm going to the actual sessions and recording these things. So, common themes across the board. I've kind of tried to show common themes across these different sessions. Demand is high for data center capacity. And inventory is scarce. Again, we just mentioned that vacancy rates are below 2%. Power grid strain, there's shift onset cogeneration, we just referenced in the data center report. And then for, AI training. So really the two components of AI, there's the training models, right? Which is your foot on the gas pedal, right? Huge power demands in the marketplace today. But there's really now the shift towards bringing in the inference side of AI, and we'll talk about that in a bit as well. Again, rapid scaling, community conflict, it's a big issue right now. You're going to open up any of the major newspapers that you're looking at, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or what have you, and read all the different articles about communities being upset with the actual data center industry. And then what you're also going to see a big trend right now is the discussion of partnering in the ecosystem and the importance of that in the actual data center community today. Before I do go too much farther, I did want to share one of the slides I did take out just in the essence of time, but just want to kind of share a few brief notes. At the data center, there's a data center podcast from Data Center Hawk, post PTC, and they were talking about some of the trends that they learned at PTC. And we took out some of the sessions that were the panel discussions that were dealing with financing in the data center arena. However, I think it's important to note that there are a lot of new players in the marketplace today, whether these young AI companies that weren't around 3 or 4 years ago. So they don't necessarily have the balance sheets to be able to kind of secure large loans, right? And so there's an overall trend as far as a shift towards traditional debt for building data centers to private equity. being invested in these data center facilities. And so these are off balance sheet type deals, which is really impacting the marketplace. And it's also important to note that a lot of these training data center facilities on the AI side, and again, I'll have Yeet talk about that in a bit. These are like it's the search, it's the training on the and the AI piece, but a lot of these facilities are built with lower reliability and redundancy compared to what you're going to start to see with the inference side of AI, which has a higher level of reliability and redundancy that's needed. So that said, here are the sessions that I went to at PTC and we're able to record at PTC. The sessions that we're going to talk about today are the sites I've highlighted here in yellow. The opening panel discussion, rewriting the playbook, powering intelligence, future of recruiting, which are going to have Di address, AI at the edge, and then streaming the world. It was also a really good session on Latin America that really I wanted to get to one key point from that, which was a lot of what they're seeing down there in Brazil, a lot of these training modules for AI, huge power demands that aren't necessarily latency sensitive up to the United States. But you're seeing a lot of that interest down in South America, where a lot of those inference requirements are going to be back up here in the United States. So the first session. And what you're seeing here on the right, these are the AI notes summary that the app basically went back and registered and drew its conclusions from. From a color coding standpoint, anything dealing with power, I've highlighted in a red color. Anything from the AI, it's purple. Anything which is money wise, green. Local partnerships, local community impact in orange, and the other yellow is just other things I wanted to actual highlight. So that said, this first session, the AI notes, and first of all, so I can stop speaking here, I want to throw it over to Yeet to say,
Sure.
hey Yeet, are there any things from this list from the AI summary that really caught your attention with this panel discussion?
No, thanks, Jason. I think that you've already sort of hit on some of the major topics and highlighting what we're going to talk about right here, right? So what I wanted to talk about was the fact that, everybody's talking about AI, and that's probably the most significant development in our space right now. And as part of that, what we're seeing is this really phenomenal shift in, both the sizes of data centers, the infrastructure associated with data centers, how they're being deployed, and all of those things are basically leading to some of the other concerns or the discussions you've already talked about, right? So as we look at data centers anymore, where we used to think that, if we had a 10, 12, 20 megawatt data center, it was a large data center, it was a big data center. Nowadays, anything less than 50, we don't hardly ever talk about it anymore. 50 megawatts and buildings are getting up to about 300 megawatts. And then we're doing these in multiples across campuses. Well, this kind of deployment, this kind of energy density, and this kind of, let's just say, deployment, comes with a couple of consequences, right? Not the least of which is, the power mismatch we've talked about, right? This type of growth, this type of, density of load and capacity requirements is going to put a strain and is putting a strain on the power grid. The power grid, hasn't been significantly upgraded, in the last couple of decades, right? And so, whenever you're trying to come up with a campus that's a gigawatt or multiple gigawatts, made up of multiples of these very, very large data centers, all of a sudden you're up against the age of that electrical distribution grid, right? It's a combination of whether there's capacity, generation capacity to meet the demand at that particular location. It's a question of distribution. Can you get it where you need it to go? And all of these things are creating a strain on the ability to deploy and to build these campuses. Well, that's also what's leading to what Jason was referring to, which was the on-site generation piece, right? And so a lot of our clients, stakeholders now, faced with this, inability to meet the timelines of their deployment, are essentially going to generating power on site, and this in itself is presenting some challenges. But we'll talk about more about that as well. But again, the size, the sheer birth of these things, and the intensity of the resources that from the electrical side that it requires is drawing the attention of the communities where we're trying to deploy these things. A lot of times, these communities where we're building these large campuses are also fairly rural. They usually don't have a lot of development to begin with, and so this kind of coming in and building this size of a campus, a gigawatt campus, in some of these communities is a very, very drastic shift. And anytime there's a drastic shift, there's got to be pushback, and that's what we're seeing right now. And I think part of what we as an industry have to do and start doing more of is we really need to sort of get ahead of this instead of being reactive, instead of trying to sort of say, what people are experiencing is not really what they're experiencing, which doesn't normally work well in any condition. We need to be able to sort of lay the facts out. We really need to be able to lay out the benefits of all this deployment. There is a reason this is happening, right? And there is some benefits associated with it. It's just that right now, the pushback is hardly anybody is able to quantify and see what that benefit is for them, right? If they're in this rural community, all they see is somebody coming in, buying a huge amount of land, and essentially getting some preferential treatment for doing this, getting the power they need, and a lot of municipalities and local jurisdictions bending over backwards to cater to this particular newcomer, if you will, and that's causing pushback. We need to address this. We need to talk about it. That's important. Now, on-site power generation, this is not something that you are data center operators are accustomed to, right? Generating power at scale, very large and continuously, is not something that typical data center operator owner is going to be familiar with. And it requires a paradigm shift. It requires a different way of doing things. And there are some technological requirements that I think we're not exactly in a position to address properly either. So as this is happening, we're also going to see some challenges with the on-site power generation that's going to eventually lead to some other issues, I suspect. And then if we look at inside the building, when we start looking at these mega buildings, very, very large capacity buildings, we need to start talking about the technology associated with distributing that power within the building. We need to start talking about how we're cooling it. And so all of these things are happening in real time. I think that's the thing that most everybody's really sort of not fully comprehending. When we had the dot-com boom a couple of decades ago, the electrical industry was stable. We had a lot of history with the technologies involved with power distribution, et cetera. So all we were doing was adapting it to a new form of deployment, right? Well, right now, to get to 100 megawatt per rack density that some of these training modules are going to AI training clusters are going to require or higher, is requiring us to look at new technologies in real time. We don't have experience with a lot of this stuff. So we're developing the technology at the same time we're deploying it. And so that's going to be presenting some challenges as we go forward as well.
One of the things that I wanted to address here too is on the screen, you'll say that some of my highlights from this particular screen, there was a discussion of the mismatch, power mismatch. It takes 17 years to build a power plant here in the United States. But on average, it's taken 2 to 4 years to build a data center facility. And so the data centers are outpacing the ability for the power plants to keep up. And by the way, intermittent power, green power, great. Great for the environment. Not great for keeping data centers on 24/7, right? So for us, it's like if you were to look at the amount of power plants planned under construction across the country as of April this year, there's literally over 30, 40, there's about 30 or 40 gigawatts worth of power plants planned under construction coming from natural gas. But yet a lot of these different data center facilities, if you were to see bullet point number 2 here, each of these AI campuses, 50 to 300 megawatts. Okay, that's low. I'm seeing a lot of people looking for gigawatt type campuses, right? And you'll see in some of the upcoming slides, that is outpacing the demand. So it's really important for us to find pockets of power across the country. Moving on to the actual next slide here. This was the next session, which was rewriting the playbook, confronting the new realities of the digital infrastructure. I know, David, you wanted to take a stab at some of the points here.
Yeah. So many of you know that I've, commissioned data centers, run data centers before, and then I've been on the corporate side of being a data center manager slash infrastructure. And we're really bad on the corporate side, right? We're really bad at not trying to commission or get new space until we absolutely need it. Well, now that, like Jason's saying, we're down to 2% capacity out there. It's a little bit more difficult to pull that kind of stuff off. So you really got to plan ahead, and maybe a 5-year forecast or something to that effect. And you still got cloud there, and I'm sure you got. There are some data centers that are running at high capacity, like Thomas's, and maybe Thomas wants to throw something in here a little bit later. His organization is still running some higher capacity racks down there. And I'll throw a little plug in for Jason's company too, where he's actually can find some of that 2% for you that of space that's still out there. Like both Yeet and Jason said, I mean, these surges are really going, up to like 300 megawatts, and the ability to build new data centers, because AI is taking up a lot of the capacity, especially these big super companies, Microsoft's, Facebook's, and all those, Google. They're taking up a lot of the space that comes out from even organizations that have built their data centers and stuff. And they're also short of labor, and I know Dai's going to talk about the labor market, and so there's a lot of stuff, hindering in Asia, delivering timely projects and stuff of that nature. And again, and Dai will talk a little bit more about that. And really, one of the biggest things that we need to do in the data center space, and I saw this even recently, was really educate the public about what it means to have a data center in their space. Because just here in LA, an organization wanted to put a large data center within a community, and the community ran them out. And but if they understood how many jobs that it provides, and other things that it benefits, taxes and everything else to the city, they would probably feel a little bit different about it. But
and I'll even chime in on one thing there. So
Yeah.
at Data Center World this year, I was involved in the leadership meetings there. And during the leadership meetings, the second half of the leadership meetings was an entire breakout session relative to the challenge that we are dealing with from a data center industry standpoint relative to the media and the perception of who data centers are. And people just keep calling them the data centers. Well, the data centers, well, that's kind of like a big bucket, right? There's corporate America, enterprise data centers, right? There's the internet-centric data centers, the hyperscalers. We're talking about 5 kilowatts of power per rack versus 25 kilowatts of power per rack. And then you have multi-tenant data centers, co-location, right? You're not going to go build your own office suite for a 2,000 square foot unit, right? You're going to go to a multi-tenant data center, a co-location facility. So those are 3 fundamental types of data centers. Then you add in the hyperscalers, but yet at Data Center World, I had a guy who was like kind of emotional in the meeting because he was talking about how people were outside protesting him based upon his corporate data center, a low dense facility that's running for their own corporate user, thinking, oh, your AI is bad. Well, why don't you talk to an AI about that, right? Why are you protesting? So there's really that need for education in the community, in the world of the media. What is AI? What are corporate data center facilities? How can they really become an asset to the environment? In the sense of moving time, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So,
Jason, real quick before we move on, I was going to say, with the community relations sense, many of the arguments that people are making are due to water usage. And it's a bit of a fallacy and like a misunderstanding of how hyperscale facilities work, how liquid cooling distributions work. The standard is a closed loop system where we're not adding additional water into these loops. Um, there is functional evaporative cooling, but it only really works in certain arid environments where it's extremely hot. And so for the majority of the facilities, we're not using a large utilization of water. And that's kind of a misunderstanding. They're calculating what's being flowed through a closed loop as new water being fed into the facility, which is not true. And so there are certain things that we need to do better as operators in presenting the understanding of how these systems work to the public, and to keep them from having these false narratives that put them up in arms.
And
Great point.
honestly, as an operator, as a corporate data center manager, I'm not seeing a lot of this good education out there yet. I don't think we've tackled that piece of it. So, as Jason and Thomas said, I think that's very, very important. And so we'll move on just in the interest of time.
Yeah. The next one was from that same session. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to balance here what the actual summaries were from each session, and then when I was going through the actual the notes. And by the way, each of these slides we can actually upload to our LinkedIn page, right? So if anyone wants to kind of go look at these individual slides specifically, you can look at them. But on top of that, we're going to be recorded. This is being recorded. We can actually upload this to our YouTube channel. So if you search AFCOM Southern California Chapter, we got a YouTube channel with all of our sessions uploaded. So. This was a quote. These were quotes from that same session from the CEO of Digital Realty Trust, right? The largest wholesale colocation provider in the world, right? And so Andy's comments were, I should say, Mr. Power. I don't know him personally, but it's really some of the threads here. There are more customers out there than ever before looking for capacity. The realization is starting to hit that people that data center inventory is exhausted. And so there are a lot of customers there that's really hitting them in the face right now, saying, "Oh, what do you mean you don't have capacity available?" I had literally one longtime data center operator, their sales team, head of their sales team, say to me, he said, "Jason," he goes, "Man, look, as soon as our facilities are being pre-leased before we even put pick in the ground." Right. And so there's just not a lot of stock inventory just sitting there ready to go. So this is like this is like hitting a lot of customers in the face. And if you look at the third bullet point up from the bottom, a lot of these IT teams that are hitting the actual marketplace are coming in saying, "Hey, I needed this yesterday." And if it's not available, it's irrelevant. I don't have time for you to go build something. So there's that scramble, there's that search, there's that race for space across the country. So, and I'll continue to move on here in the essence of time.
If I can
I'm
follow up
sorry,
real
you have a
quick,
comment
Jason, on
there?
that point. Yeah, I would say that I think that's the current dynamic, absolutely. And eventually, in the next 2 to 3 years, that will slightly change in the sense of we're going to be getting a lot denser systems. A lot of these denser systems are now going to free up additional rack space that was unavailable, but there will be a power constraint, right? The new racks are going to take up all the power that the old racks were using, but there'll be a lot of real estate available without power. And so that's going to be the new dynamic moving forward, is going to be power constraint with real estate available. But I mean, that's, future looking a few years down the line.
And which is interesting because a lot of what I'm dealing with at Data Center World, particularly last year, are these sessions where people are saying we've got powered land. Okay, you do. You have powered land, right? Okay, you have land. The power company owns the power generation, right? Not the landlord of the property, right? So if you have a commitment to have that power capacity to your site, who's paying for that? Because a lot of power companies today are making you commit to the utilization of that power too. So it really is interesting. A lot of the needs that are out there, the phantom projects that are out there, right? Who really has what kind of power? So moving on to the next session. This was called Powering the Intelligence, the Energy Impact of the Data Center Facility. I'll pause here for a second just to kind of call out. You start to see a lot of the orange coloring here. The orange coloring here was tied back to the community relations piece, right? Of how are communities dealing with this huge data center demand? If I go to the next slide here, and these are comments from Jacob Carmark, and Jacob was the original founder of Aligned Energy, which is now Aligned Data Centers, one of the largest data center providers in the world. Okay, and so just some of the comments here from Jacob is that really he's wanting to kind of illustrate to the audience how the grid works and how that there's basically the accumulated right here in the middle. There's that accumulated demand curve. There's a great book, I think I mentioned on my call last time. I was looking around for it. It's called The Grid. And The Grid is a book that was written about how in the United States you have the Rust Belt states, where up in Ohio's and Chicago's and what have you, and you had this whole mindset of people have their own power plants on site for all these old manufacturing facilities have their own smokestacks, right? And it wasn't until later that the power grid came out, and these legacy power grids within city centers are at such low densities, you're not going to be able to accommodate that high power capacity of an AI. You're going to the outskirts of town, and so, but now we're to the point where we're kind of counter steering a bit. We're going back to on-site cogeneration. And what Jacob was talking about in this session was how can we, as a data center community, be a good steward of the actual industry? How can we become a partner with the local cities and the local municipalities to the point where he was saying, and the very bottom point here is like, hey, a comparison to virtualization in the software industry on servers, right? Historically, you used to have one application per server. So whether or not you were using the application, that server was always running. It was always on. So the metaphor for this is leave your car running in the garage tonight because you're going to need to drive to the office tomorrow, right? Well, virtualization consolidated servers, multiple applications in one server. Jacob's comment here is, why aren't we doing the same thing with the actual data center issue? If we have spikes of power in data center facilities, can we get to the point where we're actually sharing the excess power that we have back to the grid? So the concept is the data center providers themselves becoming themselves independent power producers, making sure that there's power available to the community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I
Just
think,
go ahead.
Jason, the point there, and one of the things that we need to be sort of cognizant of is that, um, you know, uh, the grid, as you refer to it, was set up so that you had basically centralized power generation and in a hub and spoke sort of arrangement where, power got generated in a central location and got distributed out to, to be consumed by end users, right? And so part of the challenge technically when you start interacting with the grid is that the grid was not set up for power to come in from from the load side back into the grid, right? So a lot of the times the challenges you have with dealing with utilities and a lot of the utilities is that if you've ever tried to do an interconnection agreement with the utility company, you'll notice that it can be very onerous, right? And that was if you had a relatively small plant compared to your grid, right? Your grid capacity. Well, when you start talking about a gigawatt campus, in comparison to, a remote location, rural area where there's not a lot of generator capacity nearby anyways, and there might not be a lot of distribution, all of a sudden that balance is lopsided, right? And there are a lot of technical challenges associated with it. And part of this is that, in addition to educating the community about, what this all means for them, we also have to start talking about, changing a paradigm shift of how we look at what's a load, how can this energy intense node, if you will, at the end of the line, essentially be a part of the solution and try to help close the gap with some of these generation capacity delivery issues, right? And I think that's what that's what we're talking about here is if you incentivize the data center campus to essentially be able to use some of its capacity during periods of time to supplement and stabilize the grid, for instance, that could be a win-win for both parties, right? And those are the kinds of things that we're starting to look at.
Well, it's funny because in the leadership meetings, I ever made a suggestion to say, well, listen, if we're actually going into a small town in the middle of nowhere, right? How about that data center operator contribute to the power to the city, right? And why not just pay for the utility bills of the residents of the city, right? That's going to make everybody smile a little bit. They don't have to kind of pay for that bill. Last point here before we move on, and the same thing we just talked about here, which is his comment of, look, if you're going to go put a 2 megawatt or 2 gigawatt data center facility in the middle of nowhere, what impact is it going to have on that community? Right? And so we've all seen hey, we're going to go convert the old mill, the old factory, this particular marketplace, and go repurpose that as a data center facility. Where the community is saying, well, that's where my dad and granddad used to work, right? So there's a lot of that emotional ties to the community that is something we need to kind of promote further education. Next thing I want to get to is the impact of AI on the world and particularly recruiting. And so turning to our IT recruiting czar of Southern California, Di, I want to get your thoughts on the impact of AI is having on recruiting.
Well, I'm bringing in good news for the listeners here because hiring's booming again. I've been staffing for 25 years, and kind of Yeet was mentioning .com. It's like .com all over again. We're hiring project managers and programmers and engineers, and we're so busy with hundreds of people applying to each job opening that we have, and it's really difficult to keep up. And I know the AFCOM panel is going to talk a little bit more about partnering with AI, but I think from a hiring and staffing perspective, we have a long ways to go. AI is good for being productive, laying out foundation for a resume and an application. But the challenge we're finding is that people are relying too much on it and not really validating the information. We see a lot of misinterpretation of words and wording. And so if you're a job seeker, don't assume the information is correct without actually fact checking everything. We feel that AI should actually just be a partner. And same thing with the data centers. We have to figure it out. We have to adapt. Doing this business for a long time, we know we have to adapt with changing times. And we have candidates, and our clients are frustrated with it. They're using bots to apply for jobs. And what it does is it just screens the job title without looking at the requirements, and it just applies. So we're getting inundated by applicants applying to ours, applying to the clients. And we've even tried AI tools ourselves, and we found out that the job seekers or the candidates are getting frustrated because it's not a person actually talking to them. They're having a hard time with the information provided. When we relay it to the client, it's again, it's too long and wordy and really not to the point. So we actually went away from that again, trying AI systems, and we're back to doing it the old-fashioned way. There's always the culture aspect, right? Anybody can figure out how to write a resume, but we as recruiters, we're here to screen culture fits and personality fits for our clients. Hiring managers want people that are good personality fit for the team and company. And it's kind of funny, even if you're not a fan of Elon Musk, he mentioned in an interview that he plans on reevaluating his own hiring processes, because he said that he discovered that the systems that he was using, the AI screening systems, were disqualifying many candidates that were possibly good, because all they're looking for is the buzzwords in there. They're not really reading the resume and seeing if they can extract other information that maybe a system is not picking up. This, of course, makes me feel good as a recruiter, because I think what they're calling the human recruiters, I think we're going to be around for a long time, because they need us to actually put that personal touch to it. And everything I've been reading about the data center industry, it's going to continue needing trainers, like you were talking about earlier, fractional CISOs to assess security, data center analysts and project managers. I mean, for a long time coming, it's that, like it says on the slide, human intuition aspect that we need those kind of people to help educate, train, guide technical skills, and maintaining the personal touch. I mean, think about when you go into a company and you have a complaint and you have to go through the prompts of an automated system, how annoying that is, right? It's much better when you get that live person on the phone, and that's how I feel. There's another thing too about, I haven't heard anybody mention this yet, but I don't know if anybody saw, there was another interview with Musk, and he has promised to be building data centers in space in the next 30 months. Not sure if it's true or it's going to happen, but if it does, hopefully it will create more jobs for the data center industry. And then if you know who Erin Brockovich is, she's now turning her attention to big tech's data centers. And she launched a project called Brockovich Data Center. And I'm reading my notes right now. And it's watching infrastructure behind artificial intelligence. So it might be somebody that you might want to watch for future information, because everybody's doing all these assessments and analysis. And she's going to be posting a lot of this online of what she's finding out.
That's fantastic. Yeah, but the point that I really paid attention to there on this was literally the quote of human intuition remains crucial to assessing fit.
Yep.
So anyway, thanks, Di. We've got about 20 minutes left here, and we've got a lot of content to cover. So I'm going to zip through a bunch of these slides, kind of share some of the actual highlights. But again, so the next one, we talked about the AI at the edge. We already talked about this. We already talked about this one real quick. This was from Steve Smith, the CEO of Zayo. And the whole comment here, the main point here is that infrastructure is not ubiquitous, right? You get the 100 level KV lines, 100 megawatt substation. In order to have the fiber, you got to have fiber optic lines, right? You don't build out fiber out in the middle of the actual cornfields, right? You're going after density. So it's where we get the combination of the fiber, the natural gas, the power lines. These are the ideal spots to build data center facilities. Well, according to Steve Smith, with this whole AI distribution, and so far it's been training, again, those lower reliability, high capacity loads. But now, as inference is starting to hit the United States, and inference really is latency sensitive, that they are, as Zayo, they're actually deploying 170 million new miles of long haul fiber. Long haul fiber is what connects cross country, metro to metro, right? And then in addition to that, they're developing another 40 to 60 million miles of metro fiber connecting building to building within a particular metropolitan area. Okay. The metaphor I use for this is the interstate highways be an off-ramp to local streets. So the local streets is your metro, the interstate highway is the long haul fiber. Okay. So in addition to that, they have 20 new routes that are currently being built. The average time to build out your network is 2 to 4 years to build. Next comment here, this is coming from Raj Mapuri from NVIDIA. I'm just going to share a couple notes here. And again, we'll share these slides on our LinkedIn page. But Raj was talking about a couple things here relative to when they build these generative AI platforms. The most important thing here is they actually are trying to standardize their power delivery, right? And they call it a reference platform, right? And so then they have the reference platform and the reference architecture, and then they have the reference design. And it's just more notes from Raj. If everyone has to start from scratch, it's never going to get done, right? So utilizing standard designs and replicating those facility after facility after facility, that's how they're developing and rolling out their data center platforms. One more, I'll kind of skip over this in the essence of time. The next session here was from streaming the world, powering global data center digital experiences. Again, this is a session with this is the one I like to call the users of the edge, right? And so this is talking about, this is Meta and Netflix and Akamai and eBay and how they're deploying their data centers in local markets. The key quotes from this session I really liked from Todd Lawrence of Akamai. And Akamai, for those who aren't familiar with them, they're the streaming service, right? And so what he was saying was, look, when they're developing their streaming services, they're targeting the top 25 largest metropolitan areas in the country. In each one of those metros, they've got 3 pops. When you start looking at secondary and tertiary markets after that, he says these markets should have 2 pops. but they don't necessarily have those pops. They're partnering with a lot of ISPs in those markets. The challenge that they're finding, which he was talking about on stage, is that they're competing against everybody else in the industry, looking for that co-location capacity in those different markets. And the same thing is being said for all of those local users in the marketplace. So really, it's kind of important as far as the impact that's having on the actual local design systems. Now, shifting over to Data Center World, same thing here. Data Center World, same common themes. Demand is high, inventory is scarce, power grid strains, etc. One thing I did want to kind of share is going back to that data center hawk reference from earlier, when it talks about demand, just to give you kind of some scale and scope. In 2024, they had tracked 6.8 gigawatts of co-location demand. In 2025, that had grown to 15.5 gigawatts. Right, so that was the session from January this year, looking at 2025 numbers. So you can only imagine what that demand is looking like this year. But at a time when vacancy rates are as low as they are, it's just giving you an illustration of why people are developing them whether they are. So regarding the sessions at Data Center World, same thing. These are all the sessions that I attended. The two that we're going to talk about here are the Data Centers 101 session, and then also Innovation at Hyperscale, which was, you'll have some really kind of interesting quotes. So that said, the Data Centers 101 session, our own Bill Clayman, who kind of oversees, he was the chair of Data Center World, AI adoption. Again, same thing. Vacancy rates are at 1.6% in 2025, even though you were seeing 40% annual growth rates of capacity. As soon as that capacity is built, it's being absorbed. And so, like I said early on, one of my clients had said to me, "Hey, or my relationships, I should say, said to me that as soon as he puts the pick in the ground, it's absorbed." This is how is the traditional enterprise user with a 100 kilowatt requirement going to satisfy that need if there's no availability? So these are all things to take in consideration. And then let's see here. We've got about 13 minutes left, so I'm going to speed through this one and then see if we've got some Q&A here from the audience. This last session was the main panel discussion at Data Center World, and you can see who was on the panel here. You had literally the heads of infrastructure from Oracle, NVIDIA, and Google on stage. And so this was literally a packed room there at Data Center World this year. And so, again, some of the focuses on let's see here. Let me go back to, well, they're on the screen. Some of the AI notes, the AI data center facility, power quality innovations, battery storage, which is behind the meter solutions, liquid cooling, accelerated construction, etc. Some of the quotes I wanted to take from this, Ram Nagapan from Oracle. He was asked the question, what do you think are the most important architectural decisions for everybody in the room? He broke it down into 4 buckets: power and networking and workload type and so forth. He identified, this is pretty self-explanatory, the AI workloads, historically training and inference. So this is, if you're looking at the training workloads, everything is done as one overall training model. And so, but he was saying that in those workloads, the workloads need to be as close to the GPUs as possible. So basically, it's almost like an in-house latency. I know we had some discussion about it. Do you want to make a comment to that?
Yeah, so as you're looking at these training clusters, these training factories or AI factories, the reason they're getting so dense and so big is because of that, what you just talked about. It's the idea of being able to get multiples of these things working together and essentially processing at the same time, parallel processing drives that densification of the GPUs and and latency, the ability of that data to basically be able to go between these clusters becomes very, very critical, which is what's driving these very dense footprints. It's AI training models. They are looking at large volumes of data being crunched, and that data needs to be at the ready when the GPU needs it. And so that's why, you'll find that in addition to the density of the power that's associated with these clusters, just the amount of fiber going between these clusters and between the GPUs themselves is pretty amazing. And all of that is just to make sure that as these high-end GPUs are processing the data is available for them to be able to do it. Otherwise, you're only as good as your weakest link, right? So if you have that latency, I don't care how powerful your GPUs are, it's going to slow everything down. So that's why we're seeing this dense environments. That's what's driving a lot of this build out.
Well, and that's where, and then back to earlier in the discussion, which is a lot of these training AI modules, which are really your foot on the gas pedal, redlining that engine, right? And
Right.
their reliability concerns are lower. But now that once you actually kind of, I don't know how you say when you complete those training models, right? And then it becomes to the inference side of the equation, which is the moneymaker for the organizations, right?
Right.
If you look at the training is the cost side, and the inference is the money side, right? Inference, the last comment here from Oracle, which is that inference AI workload contradictory to the training side needs high reliability, high availability in these facilities. And so the other comment here, and then we'll go to some Q&A. This was from Baron Sakaker, and who runs from a Google data center standpoint, and a lot of his comments. So the question was, hey, so what is the path to a multi-gigawatt campus? What does it realistically look like? Um, and Varun's, and it's pronounced Varun, um, they're not designing an individual rack. They're designing an entire system. And all that entire system becomes an ecosystem. And what he is saying is that that entire campus, let's say if it's a 300, I'm just using a round number, 300 megawatt campus. That 300 megawatt campus itself has its own ecosystem of different GPUs all working together. And so they call that overall campus a product itself, right? And when they're actually going into a particular marketplace, it's all about ramping up. This isn't a site that you grow into. These are sites that you actually go in, you're turning on the knob, and that facility is operational. That entire campus is running at full bore. So it's very different. Third bullet point from the bottom. It's very different from the world we used to live in just even a couple of years ago. So anyway, so with that all said, that concludes the main slides that we have. We've got about 6 minutes left here. What is it? Can anybody from the board that's
Yeah, so we had one question come in is like, where can we find these slides and what period of time can we find these slide deck?
Yeah, I'll put individuals
in.
Yeah, so I'll put them up on our LinkedIn page. And so we've got our LinkedIn page, and you can also go to our YouTube channel if you want to rewatch this whole session. And let's see here. If I were to go back into LinkedIn and you go to
While you're looking that up there, Jason, Ann Webb, one of our participants, brought up that there's a forum that was launched called the Data Center Awareness Network, and it's you can look it up in LinkedIn, and it's the idea of this whole notion of getting information out to the community, and these are stakeholders and important part of our community, essentially getting together and putting together the informative information and sharing it so that can have that community interaction and essentially get the knowledge sharing out there. So look that up under on LinkedIn. It's the Data Center Awareness Network.
And then from our standpoint, if you were to go to the AFCOM and Data Center World group on LinkedIn, we'll post our slides there, but we'll also post our slides into the Pacific West Coast Data Center and IT Network group on LinkedIn. And so by all means, we could share them that way. Were there any additional questions we had?
And then Greg Stover,
Greg Stover, who's that?
Yeah, I don't know. but he seems to have wandered in on this session. Anyways, Greg brought up that on the AFCOM national site, there's essentially a link that we'll provide. It talks about the 5 concerns with data centers and how to deal with them and get the facts out. That's available as a resource as well. You also posted that Vertiv has about 2,200 open positions. Anybody interested, go there. Um, and I think uh, Andrew Robertson asked, was there any discussion at these conferences of sovereign data and process in relation to emerging regulations, national and global, for AI?
Yes, but I did not include those responses in the session today because we were covering so much territory. Happy to go back through and try and extract that intel from the different sessions. Like I said, I have every single thing recorded, the transcripts for everything. So I'm sorry, was that Andrew?
Yes, Andrew.
If you want to have Andrew just reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'll try and see what I can extract for him.
All right. I think that is all the questions that are open.
Okay.
We've
Well, let's take
answered.
these last 4 minutes to kind of go around the board here. I know Todd, I think you joined on right after we did the actual introductions. So if you wanted to introduce yourself real quick.
I think Todd dropped off.
Okay. All right. And I think Caitlin had to drop off too for another commitment. So I guess what I'll do is I'll kind of go around the board who we have left here from a board standpoint. Any final comments? I guess we'll start with Di. Any final comments that you have on trends that we may have missed?
Um, no, I'm just hoping to see a lot more hiring in the data center world. It's just, it's kind of where I started out with desktop and help desk and staffing people in the data centers. And there hasn't been an abundance of it over the years. So I'm hoping to see a lot more again because, like I was stating, when I'm reading about what's happening and what kind of jobs are still going to be safe, it's people for data centers because there's so much going on. There's so many challenges.
Thomas, anything else you want to add?
No, I appreciate that resource, Greg, you sent out. And yeah, it'd be interesting to talk with the most recent comment that just came in from Walter regarding his understanding of the water usage issues in NorCal. But yeah, no, nothing additional to add. But yeah, Walter, if you wanted to reach out directly, I'd be happy to discuss.
Yeet.
No, I think we've covered. Certainly, we haven't addressed everything that's going on, but we've covered all the major points. And I think that if one thing that sort of even in the comments and as we've talked about here, it's going to be critical for us as we adopt these technologies, as this development is going on with these AI data centers and campuses, how we deal with the community, how we become a partner is just going to be very, very critical because otherwise we're going to run up against a whole series of issues that's going to stifle our ability to address these issues.
David?
Well, I just think this is a trend that will be here for a while, but like the cloud did for us. We were all talking about cloud a year ago, and now look what we're talking about AI. So at the end of the day, I think Di's right. It just opens up new jobs for everyone. People say, well, AI is going to take away so many jobs. Well, it's going to transfer jobs into a different modality and stuff. So
You just have to adapt.
yeah, you just have to adapt, and from maintenance of data centers to running them, or building them. That's where I think the jobs are going to be in the future, and yeah.
Okay. And then lastly, just to wrap up, I know we got another 1 minute left. I will just say thank you for everybody for participating. Looking forward to our third quarter session. In that session, what I'm going to try to do is maybe reach out to have a few guest speakers from Data Center World. That were some of the key one-on-one panel discussions that we attended, so we can share some of that intel as well. And then looking forward to trying to do, I should say, a fourth quarter holiday social So again, we always, as a not-for-profit organization, we do rely on sponsorships. So again, if you're interested in sponsoring our chapter, we'd love to kind of hear from you. David can speak to you about some sponsorship packages. So again, we're right at 3 o'clock. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. And until the next time, we will go from there. Have a great day,
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks,
Jason.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.